Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's deep dive. We are zeroing in on a single monumental day, August 11, 2026. This was a day that delivered an incredible series of global movements. I mean, we are talking about massive tectonic shifts here. And I mean that both in the literal, physical sense, with some devastating earthquakes, and in the figurative sense, with these huge geopolitical, diplomatic, and domestic policy realignments happening all over the globe at the exact same time. By mapping out the events of this specific day, we get a crystal clear picture of just how rapidly our world is changing. Here's our roadmap for today. First, Middle East tensions and flashpoints. 2, Eastern Europe and conflict. 3, global crises and rights. 4, new defense and peace pacts. And finally, domestic policy and tech law. Okay, let's dive into this.
Section 1. Middle East tensions and flashpoints.
So we're seeing an incredible density of events concentrated right in this region. First up, in a ruling that carries immense historical weight, a Syrian court actually convicted former President Bashar al-Assad, along with his brother Maher, of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and mass arbitrary detention, all stemming from their 14-year civil war. Both men were officially sentenced to death in absentia. And right at the exact same time, the geopolitical chessboard shifted in the Gulf, with the U.S. asserting control over the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, over at the United Nations, the Security Council was convening an open debate focused heavily on surging settler violence, property destruction, and human rights concerns in the occupied West Bank. It's a lot happening at once.
Let's look a little closer at that Strait of Hormuz development, because it's a big one. U.S. President Donald Trump described the American naval blockade around this critical global corridor as a steel wall. The U.S. has essentially declared that it solely controls the passage, laying down a very firm demand. Tehran must pay financial reparations for U.S. casualties before any American sanctions will be eased. It's a profound assertion of naval and economic leverage in what is literally one of the world's most vital maritime choke points. I mean, this directly impacts the global shipping routes and the energy prices we all see every single day. Now, what's really interesting about this contrast is the stark difference between diplomacy on paper and the gritty reality on the ground. On one hand, we have the diplomatic channels moving forward. Board of Peace officials affirmed that their 15-point Gaza peace framework remains fully active and operative, and that's even after facing public rejection by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But on the other hand, the immediate military reality tells a different story. The Israel Defense Forces targeted a Hamas sniper position right near the Gaza Strip's yellow line. This was the very first reported strike inside the enclave in 10 days, which really just shows you how incredibly fragile the balance between peace frameworks and active military operations truly is.
Section 2. Eastern Europe in conflict.
This conflict is operating at a really intense pitch on two completely simultaneous fronts. You have the violent military external front, and then you have this strict domestic political front. So looking at the military side, Russian forces launched a coordinated strike using North Korean-supplied ballistic missiles. This massive barrage killed at least 6 people in Zaporizhia and 3 civilians in Dnipropetrovsk, while also setting off major blazes in Kyiv. But meanwhile, back on the domestic political front in Russia, the landscape tightened even further. Russia's Supreme Court officially disqualified the country's only prominent anti-war political party, Yabloko, from participating in the upcoming parliamentary elections. The court cited alleged copyright infractions and threats to territorial integrity as the reasons for the ban.
Section 3. Global crises and rights.
7.4. Just let that number sink in. The sheer scale of this 7.4 magnitude earthquake striking Western Colombia and the border areas near Ecuador is absolutely devastating. The raw power of this tremor caused widespread structural collapses all across the region. And in response to that immense damage and the immediate human need, the United Nations had to quickly step in, mobilizing international humanitarian assistance teams to support the recovery and the really critical rescue efforts happening on the ground.
Pivoting over to Southeast Asia, we're seeing another kind of crisis entirely being documented. Human Rights Council investigators presented some truly harrowing findings regarding systematic atrocities carried out by Myanmar's military junta. These investigators documented highly concerning specific details: deliberate military airstrikes targeting civilian infrastructure. We're talking specifically about schools and displacement camps, as well as rural villages. On top of that, the report laid out widespread instances of torture and arbitrary detentions. It paints an incredibly grim picture of the systemic abuses occurring right now under the junta's rule. Section 4. New defense and peace pacts. And this brilliantly illustrates how nations are trying to forge paths out of long-standing conflicts. This is a massive legislative step toward internal resolution. the Turkish parliament held a landmark vote, passing sweeping legislation by a really wide margin of 468 to 88. The explicit design of this new law is to advance peace talks with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. By establishing these legal mechanisms for the repatriation of thousands of militants, Turkey is opening up a significant diplomatic door to address a conflict that has literally spanned decades. Over on the international alliance front, a brand new tripartite pact was formalized. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan have officially aligned under the newly signed Mecca Joint Defense Agreement. Diplomats and top military leaders from all three of these nations gathered together to establish this mutual cooperation framework. This signals a major strategic alignment that connects key powers across both the Middle East and South Asia. Section 5, Domestic Policy and Tech Law. Bringing things down to the domestic level, in the United States, two major shifts occurred that directly impact everyday life. First, in the realm of technology and law, a federal appeals court cleared the way for thousands of lawsuits to proceed against some absolute tech giants. We're talking Meta, Google, TikTok, and Snapchat. The core claim here? That these platforms deliberately engineered their algorithms to be addictive to minors. Secondly, over in public health policy, President Trump signed an executive order designed to restructure the childhood vaccination timeline. The new directive promotes spacing out vaccine doses and specifically calls for the separation of the combined MMR vaccine into individual doses. These are monumental shifts that could fundamentally alter how our kids interact with their screens and how they receive their health care.
So the crucial point is 175,000. That is the massive number of visas the U.S. State Department confirmed have been completely revoked from foreign nationals. This sweeping action follows law enforcement encounters and screening reviews that were executed under second-term immigration enforcement directives. It's a vast administrative shift, right? And it carries direct, immediate implications for international travelers and residents currently within the U.S.
Finally, taking a look at South Asia, we see how quickly domestic governance can tighten around issues of national identity. Indian President Draupadi Murmu officially granted assent to new legislation that makes disrespecting the national song Vande Mataram a criminal offense. Now, it's really important to note the context of this new law, because it was enacted right amidst active student assembly protests happening in the state of Jharkhand. It's a clear demonstration of the ongoing tension between strict state legislation and civil demonstration. So, from the halls of the Turkish parliament and the courtrooms of Syria, all the way to the naval waters of the Middle East and the social media feeds on our phones, August 11, 2026 was undoubtedly a day of profound structural change. We have seen diplomacy clash directly with military action, we've seen nature literally reshape landscapes, and domestic policies rewrite the rules of daily life. The question I leave you with today is this. Of all the macro and micro events we've unpacked here, which of these global shifts will ultimately define our tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.